Hi everyone, my name is Maya from Tribeca New Music, and I'm here with the wonderful Wolfgang Muthspiel, who will be performing on August 16th at 7 p.m. this Saturday at Christ and St. Stephen's Church. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey, how you became a guitarist, how you became a composer? We want to know everything.
Wow, that's a big question. But the short version is I started when I was 6 years old. I started to play the violin, and then I switched to classical guitar when I was 13. Started getting into jazz around the age of 15, and then I kind of played both classical and jazz, studied both until I was about 22. And then I had to sort of decide one or the other. And I went for jazz and I kept studying jazz and spent 15 years in the States where I met most of the people I still play with. And yeah, so these two poles are basically in my life, the pole, one being the improvisational side and the other one classical music.
So you had a traditional base of classical music and you were able to sort of explode outwards into different genres?
Mostly classical training until I was 15. Playing classical music, Bach and Mozart, and on the violin, and mostly Bach and Renaissance music on the acoustic guitar. Those were my favorites. But then I also had I have two siblings, three siblings, and two of them are also musicians. And with one of them, I played a lot with, and I improvised a lot with when we were young, before we even knew anything about jazz. So this kind of process of just sitting down with all the sound sources you have at home and making music on the spot, that's something pretty familiar to me from an early age. So we got introduced to this idea of improvisation, like kids just play and make up stuff. So that was the beginning of that. And when we found out that there's a genre that has in its center the art of improvisation, then we were of course totally hooked on, checking that out.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Was it hard sometimes performing or practicing with your sibling?
Well, it was hard because there's no diplomacy with siblings, so
Yeah.
you're very direct, and many rehearsals ended in fights. But we actually played together for a long time, and we made a lot of actually we made records, like I think five or six, and we toured and stuff, and so we had a duo going for a long time.
So, from your bio, you seem to have been extremely active with the different business ventures, I would say, if that's too technical, of like creation of arts organizations. You had a label, you formed quartets and duos, you had a focus year program. How did you come up with all of these ideas and then how did you sustain them?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a musician, who lives the life of practicing his instrument and exploring pieces and composing and performing and traveling. And at some point, I started a label because of one project that was scheduled with another label that was already prepared. The label kind of backed out in the last moment. And at that point, we just decided to do it ourselves. And then that's why we formed this label. And it was an interesting journey to run this label. We did about 40 records or so. In the meantime, my work is now with a beautiful label called ECM. So the last five albums are with ECM, and so I'm not very active on my own label anymore. But it was an interesting experience to see that side of the business. I think I learned a lot from it. I mean, essentially, I don't think I'm extremely talented in those realms. So we made a lot of, greenhorn mistakes, but the whole operation was pretty much an idealistic venture. And I think many types of releases were possible because it was on my own label, because there was nobody to say yes or no to any project. So we did quite unusual projects. Like I did one record that was all around music that I wrote around Gregorian chant, and we did a solo improvisational record of Turkish pianist composer Aydin Ezen. Sometimes people that started with me and stuff like that. I'm happy now to be with ECM, a label that kind of formed me also because I listened a lot to their music when I was growing up and getting into jazz. And also I love their classical repertoire. And so I'm very happy with them. And the other project that's outside music is basically outside my own music is Focus Year, which is a kind of immersion year that I founded in Basel, Switzerland, and where we put together a band of extremely talented musicians who work together for a year, and every second week they are being coached by different interesting artists from our scene. And this is my attempt to have a place of education that is not based on any kind of credit system or diploma or degree. It's just 1 year of music, no side subjects either, just playing in the band and being together. And all participants get a full scholarship. So this year is also a year where they don't have to think about money. And so it was my attempt to create a situation where there's 100% focus on music and nothing else, which is not so easy to create in an academic environment. So that's a beautiful project I'm very happy to be involved with.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible opportunity.
It's really a dream come true that this can happen there.
Wow. Now I need to learn jazz and apply. um, Anyways, moving to another area of yourself, which you're a composer, can you tell us about the US premiere of Etudes, Quietudes this Saturday? What about this piece is special? How did it come about? And what are the sets that you're doing of Etudes?
I've always written music for all my bands and also for different ensembles. Kind of writing was always a part of my music making. And in this case, it's a cycle of pieces that I wrote for myself. The starting point was I want to write etudes that, I want to practice for certain technical things. And then I really began to fall in love with the composing process and also the limits and guidelines of what you have to write in order for it to be an etude. At the same time, I wanted them to be concert pieces that I want to play for an audience and for myself, because I wrote some of them because the existing etudes didn't really satisfy me after playing them for so many years. I wrote this cycle of etudes that I also recorded. I've played it a lot in Europe, but it's the first time I'm going to perform this in the States. I'm very, very excited to share this with audiences there. And basically, it's a set of etudes. It's a total of 11 etudes, and I often create interludes between them, which I improvise. So there's a set series of pieces, but in between, I often improvise, and also there might be moments where I use some loops or some electronics or things like that. But the pieces themselves are completely notated and written for classical guitarists.
Amazing. And what's the Quietudes part of that? Is that the interludes?
No, part of those etudes have a certain space of quietness, and there's also the fact that you play alone the acoustic guitar, and etudes is something that you're alone with the instrument and those pieces, and hopefully nobody else is listening so that you can really practice. And the rest of the record also has some other pieces, like I play on a sarabande of Bach. First I play the sarabande and then I improvise over it, not over it, but after it. And there's certain kind of quiet spaces that arise in the music, and I thought it would be nice to have the name that signals that. Plus, I love the combination of words, etudes, quietudes, as like a pair of related things.
Yeah, it feels very natural to say. So, a question we always ask at Tribeca New Music is what advice right now would you give to upcoming composers and musicians who want to sort of explore a new avenue of music, a new genre? What advice would you give these people?
My advice is always rather old-fashioned, I think. I would say make sure you really like and love, maybe love is a too big word, but I use it, the sounds you're creating. Don't create them because they're interesting. Be private when you compose. Write those things that you want to hear, because then we want to hear them as well. I think that maybe in all genres it's important that one is sort of stubborn with his taste, that you create really what you like. And, you put certain sounds or forms into the world and you live with them because you will probably play those pieces or hear them. Better make sure you feel good with them.
That's excellent advice. Thank you.
All
Last
right.
question before we say goodbye is what are you listening to right now?
Very interesting question because making albums and touring and listening to recordings that one did or videos that are coming out, or you're constantly kind of have to listen to some of your own work until it's finished. Once it's finished, I don't listen to it anymore. But since that's quite a bit of music, I often don't really listen to music at home. But I can only say that I often hear live music, through cooperations with other musicians. And I recently was spending a week in Spain with some great musicians, and I listened to the beautiful Melissa Aldana, wonderful saxophone player, and I listened to a great singer from Great Britain. Her name is Sarah Dowling, and the drummer Jorge Rossi, and the bass player Felix Moseholm. And we are a kind of team of teachers that, were hanging out at this beautiful camp, jazz camp. And I heard many master classes of the other musicians and heard them play on sessions and at the concert. And that was inspiring to hear fellow improvisers do their own thing and talk about the process of how they practice, etc. And that was an inspiring thing because I often don't, decide, okay, I'm now going to listen to a beautiful piece of music, put it on the turntable and sit back and relax. I would love to do that more, but I really don't.
Well, since your life is just completely full of music already, you're already living in that, right?
Yes, and I'm super interested in music that I don't know. And when I come across something that I didn't know before, I'm always very happy. But for me, it has to be like to make sure that whatever I produce, that I listen to it carefully enough, and then often after these processes, I'm not too interested in other music.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much for being here and answering all my questions. My name is Maya from Tribeca New Music. I'm here with Wolfgang Muthspiel, and he will be performing on Saturday, August 16th at 7 p.m. at Christ and St. Stephen's Church with Fareed Haq, Dan Lipple, and a special guest, Joel Harrison. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.